Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am joined by my friends and colleagues Alexandra and Whitney to break down the astrology of March for all of you. Holy cow, it is a huge month astrologically. This is the month that I had circled on my calendar as the busiest and most dynamic month of 2025. We'll obviously see if that's the case or not, but a major conflagration of planetary alignments in the sign of Aries will be a lot of what we talk about today, but there's also some other really interesting dynamics taking place, including a couple retrogrades that dip back into the sign of Pisces. Anyway, we'll get into all of it today. I'm very excited to do that. But before we get into it, remember to like and subscribe. We are seeing what we can do to get to 80,000 subscribers on the channel. It's kind of a goal we set for ourselves. We're about halfway there. We're at 75, which is really great growth over only a couple of months. So thank you to everybody who subscribed recently. It's free to do so, and it really does help us grow our work and the community. Transcripts of any of these daily talks can be found on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. I have two quick promotions for the day that I want to share with you before we get into things. First of all, when you go over to nightlightastrology.com, I want you to click on the events page. And if you are in Minneapolis, we have our next live in-person gathering for the spring equinox. That event is taking place at the Grapevine Collective in Minneapolis on Saturday, March 8th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. We are going to have some time to reflect on the meaning of the equinox. We're doing it a little prior to the equinox because my kids have spring break and we're going to be taking some time out as a family on the actual date of the equinox. We're doing this a little bit early, but it'll be a really nice time to center ourselves, gather, and prepare for the transition of light together and have some community time. So if you are interested in attending, it is free. Just RSVP on the website. Again, go to the events page, in-person events, and we hope to see you there. Please bring a friend too. Anyone who likes a little bit of meditation and movement and astrology, as well as cookies, then yeah, you'll have a fun time. Go to the events page and click on live talks. And you are also going to see a couple of things coming up in the month of March. Early part of March, I'm giving a talk on the third house, also because we're leaving town for a little bit with my kids. So the March 6th will be the next live webinar that I host on the third house. If you've never learned about the third house, it was originally called the Temple of the Moon, and we're going to talk about why and how you can get the most out of the third house in your birth chart. Now, also, you'll see my April webinar is listed there. And then finally, if you go to speaker series, you're also going to see that in the month of March, we have 3 new speakers who will be giving talks. Aaron Dosch will be giving a talk on decennials, which is an ancient timing technique. Matthew Kenny, a Nightlight alumni, will be back and talking about antitia, contra antitia, and like ingirding, which are really interesting concepts. And then Drew Levanti will be with us giving a talk on myth, math, and magic in ancient astrology, which should also be really good. Those are all free events, and they're all free, made possible because of your contributions to the Kickstarter every year. So thank you to everybody for that, and we hope you enjoy those events. Now, on that note, let's bring Alexandra and Whitney back. Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, we're back. And are you guys ready for the most fiery month of the year?
Yes.
It's a
better. We gotta be. We have no choice.
There's no choice. About to happen. Yeah, I mean, we're going to go through all of it, but the big headline is Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde in Aries, a solar eclipse in Aries, and Neptune entering Aries, and a couple of, conjunctions too, and Cazimis, and all super fiery and in Aries. It's like this month is like, if you want a crash course in the archetypal sign and temple of the Ram, this is it, right? Like you're going to get a thoroughly Aryan experience this month.
So fasten your seatbelts, folks.
Yeah, it really is. We are on a little bit of a time constraint today because of things going on with families and kiddos and stuff like that. So what we're going to do is begin with hearing a few of your stories from the month of February that you sent in through the Grabbed series. So let me tell you how you can do that really quick. If you ever want to share a story about any of the transits you experience that we talk about here or on any of the episodes on the channel, you can use the hashtag grabbed in the comments section and then tell us the name of the transit and then tell us the story and what happened to you under that transit. Make it concise. Try not to use a lot of astrological jargon. It's much better if you just tell us the transit and tell us what happened. You can also email us the story grabbed@nightlightastrology.com, and we curate these stories. And sometimes I do grab storytelling episodes, and we also feature some of your stories here on our monthly overviews. So on that note, Whitney's gathered some stories to share with us that you all sent in from the month of February.
I have. Thank you. It was so fun reading all of your stories. Please continue to send them in. Just reiterating what Adam said. We had some potent astrology in February, that is for sure. And we've got some stories to represent that. So I have 2 stories for you from the Leo full moon, and I have 1 Mars retrograde in Cancer. So let's start with the first, which is actually kind of a double whammy. So it starts. I was wondering how February's full moon in Leo would affect my teenage son, who is an Aquarius rising with a stellium in Leo. On the night of the full moon, one of the brackets on his antique bed failed and the mattress fell, not dangerously, but enough to wake him up. The poor guy had to get up in the middle of the night and sleep on the floor. He's fully grown and the bed is relatively small, so this wasn't expected, but it was disruptive. Right away, I noticed the relevance. The Leo full moon was in his 7th house, the place of rest. Also, Uranus was in his 4th house, and this was a sudden event in his home. But wait, there's more. Then something else happened the next day. As I was removing the mattress and box spring, I couldn't believe what I found wedged in between them. Poo-Poo, his beloved stuffed hippo, who had been tragically lost since July 2023. Around that time, his father and I had told the kids we were separating. My son had been really upset, given everything else that was happening. I had ordered a replacement hippo, but Two-Poo, as we named him, didn't resolve the feeling that Poo-Poo's disappearance was a bad omen. So finding Poo-Poo this February, 18 months later, felt like a miracle, like a resurrection from an underworld experience. My son was thrilled. At the same time, we talked about how comforting it was to know that Poo-Poo never really left.
Wow. Yeah.
Adorable.
I love that. And it's so like one of the things you guys know I've said a bunch before is that astrology is at its best when you can also it's at its best when you can notice the symbolism in simple things.
Yeah.
Because it's just as important to see that beauty and mystery reflected in these granular little events than only locating it in the major moments of change or crisis or whatever they may be. Yeah, that's great.
Kind of a sweet one for what was a heavy moon for some folks.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Myself included. No. Okay, so let's go on to our second Leo full moon story. This is also about a son. My 8-year-old son was grabbed by the gods under the Leo full moon. He is a Virgo rising, putting the lunation in his 12th house of the unknown and the unseen. The Aquarius Sun and Mercury, his chart ruler, tightly conjoined his natal Mars in the 6th house of health. He had an eye exam that day to confirm that he was in fact colorblind, as we had suspected. We became aware of what he literally cannot see.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
All right. So then we have one last grab story to share related to the Mars retrograde in Cancer. I'm a Sagittarius rising, and this Mars retrograde showed up for me very clearly when Mars retrograde in my 8th squared my natal Mercury in my 11th. The day of that square, I got into a big argument with a few friends that left me feeling shocked, confused, and hurt. Something that was very important for me to communicate throughout the fight was that if I'd have done something to hurt someone, I truly want them to let me know so I can understand what I did and not hurt them again. But if they don't communicate it, then it's unreasonable and unfair to expect that anything might change. We all still owe each other kindness and respect, even when communicating about sensitive topics. While I'm not going to completely cut ties, this conflict made me realize that I need to distance myself going forward, and I'm not willing to disrespect myself in order to keep them happy.
Hmm.
So, what you all said about emotional exchanges and cutting complicated ties was spot on.
There we go. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that is also an example of how powerful the retrograde planets are when they make a hard aspect to something in your natal chart. You know, squares, conjunctions, oppositions, but even trines and sextiles. I've heard some stories where the contact is noticeable. You know.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the Adam's, the champion of the connotations of the eighth house around karmic entanglements and the things we owe others and our indebtedness to others. And that story really gets at that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's kind of funny because as Mercury moved into Pisces this week in the time where we're filming, I actually also had a spat with a friend, and this is my eighth house. And one of the things I said was like, we don't have a contract. What is going on here? And of course, the astrology clicked right there. It's wild.
Right.
All right. Should we get into our...
Those are, we got through.
Yes, totally. All three that quickly.
Yeah. You know what? Let me let Hilda out because Ashley's home and she's like, I need to go see one of my people.
I'll tell a grabbed from the world as
there you
Adam's
go.
doing that. Something that I was really thinking about in February during the whole Super Bowl saga is that we had, Jalen Hurts and Pat Mahomes, who Jalen Hurts natally has Mars in Cancer, and Pat Mahomes natally has, we don't have a time for him, but he most likely has the moon in Cancer. And then as a halftime performer, we had Kendrick Lamar, who also has Mars in Cancer. And basically his whole halftime performance was this big diss track to Drake, who has his natal moon in Cancer. So thinking about the victors of that Super Bowl picture as these two men with Mars in Cancer against these two men with the moon in Cancer, I was reminded of just, a lot of friends and listeners and grab people and commenters on the videos and clients are always like, I have a planet in fall. I have a planet in detriment. Am I doomed? Is this going to be a death sentence to this part of my chart? And I thought that the Super Bowl was kind of like a fun thing to look at when you're looking at the ways that planets in fall can function during transits that might be really tough for other people with dignified moon in Cancer, for example. And in fact, the victors were both Mars and Cancer individuals.
That's interesting. It's funny because it wasn't until after the Super Bowl halftime show that I started understanding some of the depth of what he was saying and also the background with Drake, because I don't know who Drake is. I don't know who Kendrick Lamar is. I don't know what any of it is. And because it's not my genre,
Right.
I am such a classic rock guy. It's kind of stupid how middle-aged I am. I'm like, it's not Aerosmith. I don't understand what this is. Like, I'm so dumb. No, I'm just kidding. I was like, I couldn't, and I also couldn't hear what he was saying. So I actually went and listened to a thing on YouTube where you could actually see the words being. So I was like, and then I understood the background. I was like, oh wow, that was quite. And I guess he won a Pulitzer too, which I was like, well,
he also just won some Grammys.
Talented.
Like he's a really interesting case astrologically. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm not really that into his music, but the performance like tickled some little art school bone in my body, and I was like, it was just really, really. It drew you in. It was so charismatic.
Yeah. The funny thing is that when I watched it again after getting all that background, because I watched it a second time because everyone was talking about it, I was like, oh, I walked out of the room and went and got food for the kids. And I was just like, I really like, my hip hop R&B, like the 90s was, and I haven't really caught up since then. It's like, but, and that was a lot of music anyway, but then I listened to it later and I was like, oh, wow, this guy's, he's very tricksterish too. There's like
we're so Gemini. I did the same thing. I went and like watched a whole 30-minute explainer video. Then I went back and watched the show again so that I could see all the words.
Exactly. I was like,
I needed the background info.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure people who like really listen to his music and know the thing about Drake were like really impressed by how witty it was. I'm like, if you had that background, I had a friend of mine who did have that background and she was explaining some things to me. And I'm like, oh, okay. But anyway, so that's a sidetrack. Let's get into it. Let's go into the first part of the month, and I'm going to pull up the chart so we can look at it. By the way, you did call it when we were saying that Mars will
I
go
did
back into
think about
contact
it.
with Saturn, but it won't be the same thing again.
Not the same results.
It will be something from the past, but not the same results. And you go, how about the Super Bowl? That was a good call. That really was.
I have been looking into their astrology for a while because, Jalen has Jupiter in late Pisces and Pat has Saturn in late Pisces. So it felt like.
Yeah. There's some things like, it's interesting. It makes me want to revisit Astrology of Sports at some point. But for today, let us start off this first part of our exploration of March's astrology by talking about this Aries Pisces cusp activation, which is really a part of the entirety of March, but we'll kind of introduce this now because it repeats so many times and it's an important thing to kind of start with. And I'm going to hand it over to you two, since you two creatively came up with this good way of starting us today.
Yeah. Well, I think we discussed this a little bit on our February episode because we were talking about Venus's dance and how the inner planets are really supporting the outer planetary ingresses that are happening this year. We see this in a few ways, and it becomes really loud in the fall when we have like a grand air trine and then a grand water trine with some of the outer planets being activated in those ways. But this month, I think one of the key things that's going on here is that we have this major activation of the sign boundary between Pisces and Aries. Some of this feels like a real building of tension and a lead up to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's happening at 0 degrees Aries in February 2026. That's the beginning of the zodiac. But it is super activated and pretty loud. And both of the eclipses this month are really impacted by it because we have Venus and Mercury both going retrograde across that sign boundary, forward, then backwards, then forward again, with Neptune going forward into Aries. So everything that moves is kind of contacting Saturn in late Pisces, contacting Neptune in late Pisces. And those two retrograding planets are actually going to do that twice. Like on March 2nd, we have Mercury conjoining Neptune on the way into Aries. And then on March 27th, later in the month, we have Venus conjoining Neptune on the way back into Pisces. So this is like a pretty interesting month. Whitney, what do you want to say about it?
I love not only the image that this wheel on the screen creates, but when we think about what it means to have all of these planets traveling kind of near the same time around the same place with some moving back and forth on that sign boundary, it speaks to me like, especially the time of the year, right? This is the spring equinox. This is almost, okay, so I'm mixing metaphors a little bit, but picture a maypole dance that you would see. It's like this delicate dance of back and forth, the planets weaving these ribbons together in an initiatory rite that is ushering us into a new season. And I think everything hits a little bit harder even because as things move into Aries, they're moving into a sextile with Pluto. So there's this level of intensity there that almost it feels a little bit of that ritualistic quality to me here. And I am looking forward to see what comes from that, right? But we're talking about these kind of opposites of water and fire, right? Now, both are cleansing, but one is creative and one is destructive, but it still clears space for a fresh start. Like one is old in Pisces and one is new in Aries. And so it's almost like with everything moving into Aries, we're moving into the doing part, having gained the faith to do it. That's how I'm seeing this all, like the big picture of the
Love
Aries
that.
Pisces cusp activation.
Yeah, there's like one of the ways that I think about this, and just to kind of illustrate this in a step-by-step way. So we've got Venus in Aries, right? And then Mercury enters Aries right away as the month starts. So both planets in Aries. Venus retrogrades, meets up with Mercury. Mercury then turns retrograde. Both planets, and then the sun enters. They both go through little Kazimis with the sun. And then as soon as they both go through their Kazimis with the sun, Venus shifts back into Pisces, where it conjoins Neptune immediately. And then we see Mercury retrograde just after a solar eclipse in Aries. Mercury retrograde hits Neptune as Neptune crosses into Aries. And then we have the remainder of the Venus-Mercury retrogrades with the North Node and Saturn in the late degrees of Pisces, while we've just had a solar eclipse and Neptune's just ingressed into Aries. Now, you take this forward a little bit, that's by the end of March, right? But if we take this forward a little bit, then both planets will station in Pisces, and then eventually they're both going to move back through Aries. That will happen all the way into May, where we see those planets still crossing through Aries, which is interesting because at the very end of May, while Venus is still in Aries, Saturn will then enter Aries. Coming from late Pisces. So I think just to kind of zoom out and re-encapsulate all that's been said, what we're dealing with is a tremendous amount of emphasis on the sign of Aries, but also a very clear back and forth between Pisces and Aries that's happening not only now, but over the next couple of months. And there's a lot happening in late Pisces. We've got the North Node there. We've got Saturn culminating there in the interim period between March and the end of May. So that back and forth, I like the way that you guys decided to focus on that at the outset here. The thing I would add to what you guys have said is just that there is often I love that you use the maypole example, because that idea of an initiatory rite, I love that. I actually used this example while I was making horoscopes with Alex and Dana, where I said, I remember the most overwhelming experiences of my life was maybe the second time I went to Peru, and I thought I knew what I was getting into going back to drink ayahuasca for a second time, but I didn't. And it was the most harrowing, difficult experiences of my entire life. Still never had an experience to now. You know, I'm sure I might at some point, but to now I've never had any more difficult experiences than those. And when I got up in the morning from the first one, I remember going, well, shit, my life will never be the same again. I am not living in the same life I was last night. I don't know where my life is heading, but it is not going where I thought it was going. It was an initiation. But in the wake of that initiation was a very profound sense of a transition happening that I could not yet see clearly, that was very overwhelming. I knew I was in a sea change, but I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know where it was going. I knew a new direction was forming, but there was a sense of overwhelm that came along with it. That's kind of how I feel about all of these things taking place between Pisces and Aries, along with the major transition at the end of the month with the solar eclipse and Neptune entering Aries to boot. It's like there's a transitional space, and we may find ourselves in one way enthused and in another sense maybe overwhelmed. And I could see this definitely being mirrored somehow in collective events, but, personally.
Yeah, I think the maypole was also a really great example, because something that struck me about this month is just the amount of timelines that are kind of converging here in Aries. We have stuff going on with Venus, Mercury, Saturn, Neptune, the sun, the moon. It's like, think about all those chart rulers across the world. Think about all those time lords for the year across the world. So much converges here in Aries. And you don't have to have any natal planets in Aries. Everybody has an Aries part of their chart, and everybody has these planets in their chart. Something that also struck me is that, Whitney, I think you said the word faith, and that is such a theme of this sign boundary, but also of Neptune's forthcoming ingress into Aries for me. And it's kind of echoed. Adam, you took the calendar out to May when Saturn comes into Aries, but just a few days after that, we have Jupiter moving sign into Cancer to form that last square too. So they're still in conversation, and Jupiter, of course, is the ruler of Pisces. And I think there's something very, very much about faith being connoted by the movements of those two.
It's also like we're in the midst of something this year that's taking place, which you were just alluding to as well, Alexandra, which is that Pluto's just changed signs to stay. Neptune's changing signs. Saturn's changing signs. Jupiter's changing signs. And don't forget Uranus coming up in July too,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of astrologers are talking about it this way, and I don't disagree at all. And it is real. I don't think it's exaggerated to say that we are in the midst of a historical collective shift of era.
Mhm.
It's a collective shift, but for each of us, that will be felt and trickle down into our personal lives in different ways. But it's a transitional year, isn't it?
Yeah, I just want to add quickly, and then I'd love to hear from you, Whitney. But I think that so many people hear that and are scared. It's very human reflex to be like, what kind of generational change? I didn't sign up for that.
Right.
But on a personal level, these changes look so much more optimistic. I mean, we can sit here and talk about cultural, societal, national, mundane astrology. There is so much positive astrology to be had on a personal level this year. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Go ahead. Whitney.
Preach, girl. Nope, that's all I have to say. Let's drop the mic on that.
Yeah. The one thing that I would add into that is that for all of us that have been, maybe put through the ringer with Mars retrograde, how nice will it be to have an exalted Jupiter in Cancer?
Yeah.
Where,
Oh, thank God.
Oh my God, I love that you put it that way. Yeah, I've been saying like if it's a wound, then this is like a medicine. But
It is.
it's burn cream. That's a perfect way of putting it. All right, well, let's go into the next section. This is really the 1st through the 15th of the month. The two major features are Mercury and Venus both turning retrograde in Aries. Venus does so to start off on March 1st. I'll take us back to that day. Venus's retrograde in Aries is happening. The station occurs on Saturday, March 1st. Depending on how you exactly time a retrograde, when it makes its first noticeable change by backward motion, or if you track it to its station, whatever, it's going to be that weekend. So, so just think about it as the first day of March is a day where Venus is changing directions. Venus's retrograde in Aries is accompanied by the moon in Aries that day as well, which is interesting. It is also taking place as Mercury conjoins the North Node and Neptune in late Pisces. We've got that kind of juxtaposition of Aries and Pisces again. So let's start off with just some thoughts on Venus retrograde. Venus retrograde in Aries, maybe things that come to mind immediately with that symbolism.
Yeah, before I jump right into Venus retrograde, I just want to mention to tie in everything we've been talking about with all of this movement into Aries, that this is a lot of intense energy, right, that we'll be experiencing. And so while a lot of folks get scared about the retrogrades, right, because they can throw a wrench in our plans, I really feel like these retrogrades are serving a purpose, and it's almost like energy cleansing, So of course we'll go through our ups and downs that we do with any retrograde, but that's just like a nice little way to look at this. Like it is for a purpose, right? And so with this Venus retrograde specifically, we will look forward even a couple, 2 more weeks on the 15th. Mercury joins this journey with her. Mercury and Venus are going through this retrograde journey together. And it's actually on that day that Venus stations retrograde conjunct the moon that Mercury enters its retrograde shadow. So I think it very much applies here. And so from that, what do we gather? I mean, our relationships, communication in relationships, we're going to slow down a little bit, okay? We're going to ask what we need to learn. What's more, I think Venus in Aries is really, really powerful. And so this retrograde to me feels incredibly cause driven, like gathering our resources and shoring up our walls of the home. Remember, the moon is here too, ensuring our safety and that we've got our stuff together before we move forward, right? And I think that this is definitely going to affect, and we'll probably see in the collective a lot of messaging, events, etc., around mothers, women's rights, relationships. We're already seeing headlines about fertility, etc. And so I think that this Venus retrograde is really going to draw more of that out as well. What do you guys think?
I'll let Alexandra go first.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the Mercury, there's so many little details here, but the Mercury-Venus conjunction happens right about where that eclipse is happening, just 2 weeks later. So depending on where you live, it happens at like 8 degrees 56 minutes, or it happens at 9 degrees 0 minutes. Mercury Venus conjoin at 8:50, 8:49, 8:45 ish, and then Mercury stations retrograde at 9 degrees. So it really is such a careful choreography. These are those moments in astrology that make me question my understanding of divinity and like the machinations of the universe. But hey, I don't have to know. I accept that. But it really feels like Mercury and Venus kind of both forgot something nice back in Pisces. Like they ran through, they're both well positioned in Pisces right now only because Mercury is, typically is in fall there. But because Jupiter is in Gemini, there's a mutual reception that adds dignity to Jupiter. So it feels like there's something left over in Pisces that they both need to kind of go back. And some themes that were coming up for me for Venus retrograde was the concept of rupture and repair in relationships. And that to me feels like sort of a universal theme for Venus retrograde, but especially in inflamed Mars and Cancer, Aries, anything that's inflamed or irritated. Venus wants to smooth that over. Bridges that were burned, maybe rebuilding those bridges or renegotiating like terms of engagement really feels like a theme that is going to come up for these two.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that we all can also note that so Venus stations retrograde on the 1st, Mercury on the 15th. On the 11th, they conjoin while Venus is retrograde and Mercury's heading toward its station. That moment's really interesting because it's taking place as the sun is also conjoining Saturn. And it's almost like I get this little funny picture in my head of like someone in some kind of movie and they're running down a street because something big is happening and someone is running the opposite way and they look and they go, oh, I shouldn't be going that way because this person's running from that direction. And that's just like my twisted imagination. But I feel like Venus may have something to impart to Mercury that Mercury then decides is worth joining Venus over. It's almost as though you can see these two planets pointing towards some moment of collaborated revision or a collaborated change of direction or a collaborated shift of plot or circumstance that they conspire to, we're going to do something a little different. The plans have changed.
I love that because Mars and the sun are also in a trine here. That happens a little earlier in the month, but it was one of the transits that we didn't really call out specifically. But I always think of Mars and the sun as co-conspirators too. And this one feels like Mars is so deep undercover in the realm of the moon, calling police chief Sun, being like, I'm still on track, don't worry, just coming up for air. So it's interesting that you're thinking of Venus and Mercury as co-conspirators because I think that Sun, Saturn, Mars trine is also a little bit of co-conspiratorial for me.
Yeah, I could also see it as co-conspirators. I'd use the word collaborators. I'd also
maybe kinder.
It could be both. Like either way is fine with me. And then I also could see, sometimes when there are weighty things that happen, like there's a gravitas in the air with Sun trine Mars and conjoining Saturn, right? And even Mars is obviously applying to trine Saturn again in direct motion. I feel like there's a consequential feeling in the air. Mercury and Venus in a cardinal fire sign changing directions feel like they're changing directions because of something consequential that's happening. That there's something in the background that those two planets are saying, oh, plans have changed and we need to act now, but we're going in a different direction. It's like receiving news. And I don't mean to put this out there as just an example, as a metaphor, right? It's like receiving news right before you're about to get on a plane for a business trip that completely I can't go on that business trip. I have to go do this other thing because something of greater consequence came up that has reoriented or have new priorities, something like that feels like it could be taking place, but then I kind of see the whole month like that,
It really is. It really is. We'll talk more about that, or I have more to say about that anyway, when we get to the Aries eclipse. But first we have this total lunar eclipse in Virgo.
Yeah, as if like this period isn't packed enough. Right in the middle of it, well, right before Mercury turns retrograde, we also have a lunar eclipse in Virgo. So right smack dab in the middle of all of that, really. Then we have here, I'll just back it up so I get it at 24. There we go. It's about 24. Or it might go down to 23, doesn't it? Yeah. So here we go. So there's the lunar eclipse at 23 Virgo with the south node. It's within 4 degrees. So it's a strong eclipse, a total lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. It's hosted by a Mercury that is stationing and turning retrograde. So another indication that this lunar eclipse is probably tied into the change of direction that Mercury is going through. But what do you guys think about this? What comes to mind about this lunar eclipse? And maybe some themes of Virgo that everyone could tap into, we can mention as well.
Yeah, I can take this because this one feels a little personal for me. I have a Virgo moon and this is happening right on my moon. So let me give myself a reading here.
Yeah. All right.
No, what I think, and you mentioned this, Adam, is that the ruler of this eclipse, Virgo, literally within hours of this eclipse stations retrograde. So these are very, very, these are interacting, right? They are tied together. And so we know that often eclipses bring surprises or, bring things to light that we weren't really sure of. And so with Mercury turning retrograde, it feels like a literal immediate turn of events. Like we are just going about face, right? Back to the drawing boards. And so if we talk about the Virgo quality of it, and Adam, you teach the sign this way, which I love and identify so much with, is that with Virgo's position in the wheel of the year, everything about Virgo is a review of what we've made out of concern for harvest, right? We have a long winter ahead of us. So what do we have now that we can work with, that we can take with us to last us through this long winter? And, do we have these stores left until the new seeds are sown in springtime, right? I think there's another interesting aspect of Virgo as well. And that, Virgo has this, actually, I just watched Adam, your moon in Virgo.
And it's in profile.
Oh, thank you. I was expecting Adam.
I saw your hands go. I knew what I needed to do.
I'm like the evergreen ones,
Yeah.
And, there's something so magical and really crafty about Virgo because of that kind of production quality that's asked of Virgo. But the correlation in the tarot is with the Hermit card. And I think it's really interesting because when we think about what's happening when we are getting ready for winter and we are preparing for a long hibernation, we think really critically about the resources we use. And that includes our energy and how much we put ourselves out there, right? So I think something that this eclipse is asking of us is where we need to pull back. Like, what have we been creating behind the scenes? What have we been doing in our secret inner realms? And a reminder that just because we may have not brought the magic forth yet, that creativity, this process is still so important. And so I have a lot of feelings about this around, I think perfection is a really good keyword that comes up a lot with Virgo, right? Like, how can we improve? How have we improved? Where did our attention to detail serve us? Where was it maybe too much in our face? And so I can see us asking these types of questions of ourselves, of myself, mid-March.
Yeah. I think the intersection between the bodily world and almost like an imaginal or non-rational or non-linear world is going to be interesting too. Like, I find that a gemstone will be more effective than an antibiotic with eclipses like these. I don't mean that everyone should take your antibiotics if your doctor tells you to, whatever. I'm just saying that there's a way in which I have nothing against allopathic medicine. There's a way in which the emphasis on Pisces and Virgo when it comes up with the South Node in Virgo is sometimes like, I need to worry less about how clean my kitchen looks, and I need to worry more about whether or not I have taken time to tap into my breath. It's like something of a higher non-ordinary state of consciousness may serve us more than getting lost in control over mundane things. I feel like sometimes that's a South Node eclipse where we realize I need to let go of things that they're never ending stressors. The dishes are always there, but you also are here to learn something about magic, mystery, faith, consciousness. You're here to hold the tension between those two things, but don't get so bogged down in this world that you miss the magic somehow. And I think paradoxically, Virgo can be a very magical sign. I always compare it to Mary Poppins, who's like practically perfect, but there's all this magic in Mary Poppins too. And to me, Mary Poppins is a figure who sort of like holds the tension between Virgo and Pisces. So I wonder if there isn't some kind of challenge for us right now around these two, this kind of mystical, romantic, and earthy, rational, practical sides of ourselves.
This is the first of 4 eclipses in Virgo between now and 2027. So it's the start of a journey. I think in some ways this one looks the most challenging because of Saturn's position conjunct the sun and directly opposite the moon. Now, anything you've got going on in Virgo has had Saturn rolling across it this whole time. So I don't think it'll be particularly novel. But a lot of what's been happening in Pisces with, Neptune and Saturn particularly has happened in opposition to this Virgo part of the chart. And it almost feels like it's been a distraction. I wonder if you have Virgo Pisces stuff, maybe think about that and, report back to me. But there feels like there's something drawing you out of these tectonic rumblings of real change that's happening, alchemical change that's happening in the Virgo part of the chart, thinking about tarot and the archetypes and the magic. Mercury is also kind of associated with the magician sometimes archetype. And so it just feels like maybe this is a time when echoes and pieces of us from the past are being presented to us, and maybe there's a time for either reintegration, like, okay, I can take this part of who I used to be and put it into my life in this new context, or just dismissing it radically. And I think Saturn's influence can't be understated, because Saturn loves the opposition. Saturn loves that laser beam. Almost feels like Mercury sneaking through, you know, the Virgo parts sneaking through the bad guy's lair. And then he like turns and he's like, oh yeah, I saw you, by the way. I have something for you, like a little laser beam of opposition.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's so
Well,
interesting with just one more thought and then let's
keep
move
going.
on. But with that relationship to Saturn there, right? Opposite the moon. But look, we also have Uranus trining this moon. And I think that's just interesting to point out, because we came off of a February Leo full moon that was square Uranus. So I think folks are sort of primed with what that might feel like. So I think there could be this little bit of Uranian wild energy with this new moon. And as you were speaking and you said the magician, and you know what popped into my head? Not sure if you're into Arthurian legend too much, but this feels like Morgan Le Fay to me, and this sort of like wild priestess, and like taking up space, you know, like how do we take, this is the largest constellation in the sky, right? How do we take up space? And how do you take up space when you are at the same time having Saturn there trying to possibly confine you? You know, that's all.
Wow. Yeah, that was great. I love
Sorry.
that. No, you actually just brought up a memory for me. It's like when someone's like really evoking something strong, I get like I'm in the IMAX, miss a memory.
Oh.
Anyway, I won't share what it was because it's a little personal, but that took me someplace. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Let's see where that Virgo
Right.
eclipse takes us.
Exactly. Well, and the other thing I think about with the just the Virgo Pisces axis in general is that the South Node in an Earth sign can really start to bring healing or integration or insight into very physical spaces. So it's kind of a crystallization of past karma around things like body or like practical things, which in Virgo can include things like your food, you know, stuff like that, where it's like there's just maybe some really tangible harvesting of insights, or for like things like lifestyle. Like I think a lot about Virgo is learning a lot about, you know, care and thoughtfulness in everyday stuff. So there might be some really nice insights gathered around that just basic mundane Virgo level as well, which is something as simple as, yes, there's daily dishes, but did you know that this dish soap works particularly good, you know, or whatever the case might be. All right.
Also to clean your rings. No.
We go to right here and we get a partial solar eclipse in Aries on March 29th. This is taking place at a time in the month where there are a whole lot of things happening. We kind of use this as the headline. But on March 22nd, we have the Sun conjoining Venus just a week earlier. So if I go back, let's go back 1 week. See, Venus is going to move. This is going to be some hours later, but here we go. You can see them at the same degree there on the 22nd. And then on the 24th, just 2 days later, we'll have the Mercury cazimi. So between the 22nd and 24th, we get the retrogrades of Venus and Mercury both hitting the Sun and having major cazimi moments, which are very empowered moments of change, connecting with an exalted Sun in Aries that is about to be eclipsed. So that sequence is the one we're going to look at next. It all happens within the span of a week from the 22nd to the 29th. Again, that's Venus and Mercury both going through cazimis with the Sun, followed by a solar eclipse in Aries. And in the midst of that, on the same, just before the solar eclipse in Aries, Venus's retrograde will also take it into a conjunction with Neptune in Pisces, who's culminating at the anaretic degree, and will shift into Aries. No more Capricorn. We'll shift into Aries on the 30th, the day after the eclipse. So again, this is why everyone circled this month. It's huge. But what comes to your mind for you two, given this sequence? And then we're going to split Neptune into Aries off and talk about that to close.
This Aries series, it was really kicked off in April 2023, then April 2024, now March 2025. I think that the April 2024 eclipse was very intense for a lot of people. And I think it's an interesting contrast. It was the total solar eclipse, and it was particularly prominent in North America because it was visible. Although, of course, part of why it was so intense is that we had a Mars Saturn conjunction in Pisces. And for most people, it was not visible because it was a very foggy day across the entirety of North America somehow with that conjunction. But I think this is a much less acute or direct kind of eclipse that's happening. To tie back into what you were saying earlier, Adam, about Mercury and Venus and how they are sort of collaborating, and maybe there's a separate line of collaboration there with the sun and what the sun is doing this month. It really is integrated during this period where the sun conjoins Venus and then conjoins Mercury, all in early Aries, which is a place that we are going to, it's going to be of significance for that Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's happening in February 2026. I also thought this was something interesting. I'd love, Adam, if you could comment further on this, but the, first two bounds of Aries is something you were talking about in one of your classes that I was listening to, but it's like Jupiterian bounds and then Venusian bounds. So at no point do Mercury or Venus leave the benefic bounds, nor does the sun as the exaltation ruler of Aries. I just thought those were kind of some interesting technical elements that I wanted to call out before we kind of dive into the delineations.
Yeah, let me just see if I can pull these up. So yeah, just so we can see the bound rulers that you were talking about. So here's Jupiter and here's Venus. And what degrees do they take us up to? Let me just check, I think.
Venus
I want
is
to say
still
10,
12.
12? Okay.
Yeah, I have my little cheat sheet right here.
Yeah, so it does mean that all of these events that we're talking about, both retrogrades, the eclipse, all take place within the bound of Jupiter or Venus. I hadn't looked at that at all, so this is the first time I've been aware of that level of the symbolism.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're fine. I love that you brought it up. I think at some point I would have. So the first thing that comes to my mind is that Venus turning retrograde in her own bound gives her a different, it really does flavor things differently. The initial thought that I have is that there's something about this that turns Venus into, this is a change that she has the power within her own nature to enact, which would be like saying, like, okay, let me just use a really stupid example, but let's say that you're an interior designer and you have a design problem in your own home. Well, you're very well equipped to deal with that change that you need to make. When it comes to hiring someone to, I don't know, let's say do contracting work, maybe you have to hire out a Mars-like person who knows how to use the tools and the hammers and nails and everything. But if it was just a design problem or an arrangement of the furniture in a particular way, you've got everything you need to make that kind of change, right? So it does strike me as interesting that, that Venus is sort of well equipped with that bound rulership that the change that Venus is enacting may be more Venusian than Aryan than you would initially think. You would think of the change as maybe being really influenced by Mars, but having her in her own bound would make the retrogradation probably related to something Venusian. That could be a lot of things: women, sisters, friends, lovers, sex, art, beauty, sensuality, whatever. But something Venusian is likely more at play than initially you would think, it being in a Mars ruled sign.
Yeah, echoed by the fact that she goes back into Pisces to conjoin Saturn 2 more times again in her sign of exaltation. So that's really interesting, especially because the bounds are, as you say, a sort of a Saturnian form of support or segmentation.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. I do like that there's support from, there's a sextile from Jupiter, right? There's some testimony there, and Jupiter's going to be having some influence over all these planets. So like, I think that there could be nothing really but positive things drawn from these planets taking place in the bounds of the benefics.
I completely agree. And I think that's so interesting because I hadn't looked at this either. But with this eclipse then taking place in Venus's bound, it brings me back to what we were speaking about at the top of the show about the Venus retrograde. And so I think it ties in perfectly here because one of the things that came to my mind as I was thinking about this fiery eclipse in Aries and what the sun is doing, it contacting all of these planets on the way in combination with this retrograde. I think I said the words shoring up the walls, but I hadn't actually drawn that to what I felt about this particular eclipse. And this is a little out there, but I watch these off-grid shows with my husband religiously. We have this like secret, I guess not so secret dream of one day building an off-grid house. Well, one of the construction methods featured on these shows very frequently is this Japanese art, but it's a Japanese functional art of sealing wood. And so what they do is they take these untreated wood boards, dry them out, make sure they're sitting in the sun, and you burn them with fire, like with a big blowtorch. You burn the wood just to the point that it chars. And how interesting is it? Because it creates this beautiful finish to the wood. It has like this kind of cool charred effect where you can see the wood grain. But the function is that it prevents fire, like it creates fire retardancy, if that is the word. Mercury and Pisces, sorry. It prevents like water intrusion, mold growth, pests. And so this feels like kind of a beautiful tie-in of what's happening with the retrograde and how we're gathering these resources and shoring up our walls, and how that is part of what this eclipse means, because this is an initiation. Like if we were talking about the ritual and everything, this eclipse, this solar eclipse, this is our initiation. And like creating something is not cute. It's freaking intense. It's burning wood, right? Like hello, childbirth. Like
Right.
it's not cute, but it takes a lot. And so maybe that's just kind of a fun image that we can tie in here and think about as we go into this solar eclipse, how that, how we're shoring up our walls, how we're making sure that we're ready for this initiation.
I love that. That is really interesting. And I think about the solar eclipse in Aries. It's interesting that the eclipse is taking place in Aries as the retrograde Venus is hitting the North Node, which is the point, the eclipse point, right? So, and taking place in Venus's bound while she's exalted and hanging out with Saturn in the North Node. Like it's just in Neptune as well. I feel like there might be. Oh my God! I cannot remember my the Odyssey. Who was the
Homer?
Woman, who was the woman who started the war? Do you know what I mean? Like the
Helen of Troy.
Yes,
Troy.
Yes, okay. Helen of Troy.
The face that launched 1,000 ships.
That's right. I can't help but wonder if Venus, and I don't mean that literally. Obviously, I'm just joking. But like, is there something Venusian that is launching a revolutionary moment? Is there something Venusian that has a real gravitas to it with North Node and Saturn and Neptune, and that it's igniting a passion? I think of someone like Joan of Arc receiving her vision.
I have Joan of Arc written down right over here too.
Okay, my God, yeah, like
for sure.
That it has the feeling of like the feminine that launches the revolution, something like that. The image of a destructive / creative force that is one of the faces of the goddess, because there are many faces of the goddess, and that is one of her faces, you know. So anyway, those are impressions that came to my mind while Whitney was talking that actually she got going in me. Alexandra, do you want to add anything too?
Two things, I guess, and we can dive into Neptune and Aries, but I think talking about Joan of Arc, another one that was coming up for me was Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh my God.
With the Furiosa, just as the, taking care of the women and trying to revolutionize everything that was going on. Like, that movie was just so loud in my head while I was looking at all this Aries stuff. So anyone with Aries, you can appreciate that. But
for sure.
I also think you talk about something Venusian launching a revolution, and I just came back as well to my themes for Venus retrograde being repairing burnt bridges or reconciling, renegotiating terms of conflict, peace treaty. There's something smoothing over, and it's so much kinder than what was happening in April 2024. So if that was a significant time period for you with that total solar, definitely look it over.
Yeah. Neptune will move into Aries on the 30th. That is our last event of the month. Let me just pull up a few things here. Hold on just a second. Where am I? I got my banner folders mixed up here. Okay, here we go. So
you have the right banner up.
No, I accidentally closed the folder with the rest of the banners, which means I couldn't close this banner later if I wanted to. So I was like, I better figure out what I just did. Okay. So I go, like, a few things that come to my mind right away with Neptune entering Aries, which one is that there's I did a presentation, by the way, for people who want like 2 full hours on Neptune into Aries, as well as a separate 2 hours on Saturn and Neptune in Aries. I did a couple of webinars. You can find them on the shop of the website. That's something I'll flash up at the end for you. But one of the things that happened, obviously, was the American Civil War. People become very passionate when Neptune is in Aries about what they believe they ought to be fighting for. Mm-hmm. And so that's a collective energy we may start to witness, which alongside of Pluto just entering Aquarius, where both the American and French revolutions took place, and the 2 planets are sextiling one another, could very well invoke a spirit of revolution and a spirit of activating what we feel is worth fighting for, and what kind of paradigmatic changes require action, something like that. So that comes to my mind right away. But aside from that, just sort of grand collective story that I'll be talking more about with some of the Neptune and Aries coverage that I do. This place of the tropical sign of fire. This is our tropical fire sign from the word tropos, which means to turn. And so the entire story of the zodiac, the tropical zodiac, is based on 4 turning points in the solar year, the equinoxes and solstices. This is symbolic. You could be living in the southern hemisphere and you can enter into this on a symbolic level. It's not meant to be thought of as a causal thing. When we think about this turning point, though, you're thinking about the moment at which we tilt into the light half of the year. And that is a moment that, whether it's in the I Ching or some of the symbolism in the tarot, sort of in a lot of different systems, that shift into the light, the yang from the yin or whatever, is often depicted as one of takeover, of conquest, of domination, of victory, of light rising out of darkness heroically. There's shadows to all of those things too: machismo, selfishness, bravado, domineering, arrogant energies, but also victorious, conquesting, heroic, courageous, action-oriented kinds of energies. So all of those things, when you mix them into the mystical Kool-Aid of Neptune and Aries, can become really powerful, which means that people can get filled with enthusiastic, charismatic, impulsive, visionary, manic feelings of heroism, conquest, crusading, action, blah blah blah, but also the bravado, the blah blah blah. So you get the idea. It's a powerful shift, and I suspect that one of the things we're going to be enjoying will be the call to do things that we haven't yet done. It's a very inceptional, like, you got to do something. It's pioneering, it's risk taking, it's brave, it's courageous. You haven't done this before and you have to do it. Or there's some new part of yourself you have to honor or acknowledge and let it out and go do it. And there's kind of that, going into uncharted territory. Neptune is not always clear. You don't always know where you're going, but you have to it's like people, I think of like, the early explorers or primitive people 30,000 years ago who didn't have a map of the globe, like they're moving and they're following the path of the sun. They're like, we'll just go west, we'll follow that path of the sun. Well, we don't know what we're going to find, what animals we're going to find, where we're going to go, but there's some need to follow the path of the sun. People do that, and migratory patterns were developed and people found their way, but they had to blaze trails that were unknown. And there's some call to something like that taking place here, I think, with Neptune entering Aries, as well as the potential to be deluded by things that we think we have to follow that may activate certain shadows within ourselves, our ego, the collective. And so parsing that out is also something we have to be patient with and know that, like, it's also okay to be inspired and not exactly know which direction to take it in, or to have to figure that out a little bit.
Yeah, I think we're really on the same wavelength today, because I put manifest destiny down here for my notes too, which is kind of what you're talking about like it's our destiny to go west, right? There's I think on a personal level for people, I'm excited to hear what Dana and Alex and you all cook up, because I think this is a much more optimistic and positive transit for individuals, especially considering this Aries part of the chart is tired after eclipses, after that last sort of tough eclipse. And so to have this surge of a renewal of purpose and a calling may feel very positive. I think on a mundane level, part of what I feel for some people is like, if you know those people who've kind of wandered a little far from the path of truth or reality, whatever that may be, I fear this is a transit that they could get caught on the wrong side of, especially when Saturn sort of cements that door back behind them sort of shut. And so I feel like challenging any fiery, heroic crusade energy that seems to suddenly take seed in your belly may be important. And March, the end of March, when Neptune comes in, it gives us 2 full months till the end of May when Saturn comes in to attune to that energy, to see what it wants from us. And Neptune is so powerful to commune with via art and images and stories of heroism. And maybe that's more of a positive outlet for anyone feeling like they want to go on a crusade all of a sudden in March.
Yeah.
Well, and I think to add to that, I love the images both of you conjured, especially around this, like, I think Alexandra, you said like the drive to go west, and Adam, you said following the path of the sun. And I think that that's really what's happening here. Is it's a deep spiritual ambition, especially on the personal level. And I think there's another aspect to this, right? Where Aries is very embodied and Venus is very Neptune is very out of body, right? And so it's how we balance the inside and the outside. So if there is something concrete to take from this, like, everybody pick up your yoga practice again, because we're going to need the deep breathing. We're going to need the flow, right? And so it's just interesting to tie that into what this could look like, because sure, there are all sorts of, I'm sure, crazy things that may happen on a collective level, right? But this is also a new generation, and we have to remember that. And so if we can embody that sort of sensitive strength, then that can help carry us through this weighty moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really nicely said. Yeah, I feel like
And invest in a hot tub. No. You got 14 years. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't help but notice that, you know, one thing we haven't spent a lot of time talking about is the fact that this month of March, all of these things happening in Aries are still hosted by Mars in Cancer. Mars in Cancer that is going back through the places visited through its retrograde. And so I just can't help but think, like, you know, pay attention to that whole sign house of Cancer in your chart, because a lot of this may actually be relating those two houses together, the Aries, and obviously the Pisces house too, but like Aries and Cancer. And it also makes me think there's emotional individuation taking place. Like, that's a phrase that comes to my mind as I was just thinking about this. It's like, okay, you know, I was listening to a talk that my friend Ari Moshe Wolf gave. This was way back in October. He gave a talk on Mars and Cancer when we were starting to collaborate, and I listened to it on his channel. He's an evolutionary astrologer. But one thing that he said that I picked up on that I think is probably all astrologers would agree to is that Mars and Cancer, one of the things it can do is it's trying to figure out how to get my own personal needs met. And there's something that can be very egotistical about Mars and Cancer. At its worst, its shadow is sort of like me, my needs, and can kind of be victimy and whiny and like a wet blanket. And then it has to work out, well, how do I mature and become capable and self-reliant and emotionally individuated, you know? And so that can be like a shadow. There's many good things about Mars and Cancer that don't walk that path either, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you have like a mama bear advocate kind of energy, and it's not dealing with that at all. But that is one thing that actually Mars in Cancer and planets in Aries may share in common, is a little bit of a childish, selfish kind of quality. I mean, as a shadow, we may all be dealing with is like, there's something, what you guys have studied a little bit of psychology, like primary narcissism is something that comes to my mind as a kind of archetypal theme. There's a way in which each of us need to be able to take care of ourselves. No one's denying how important relational things are. Like, we are not automatons existing in vacuums. We are dependent upon one another, and we should be caring, thoughtful, considerate, and relational, because it's part of how we stay healthy. But then there's this part of us that needs to mature and individuate. You know, I need to be able to get my own needs met. I need to be able to take care of myself and do my own things. And I just wonder if part of this also isn't about saying, like, if it's difficult to do, but I have to do this on my own, or if it's difficult to cut someone else off who's being needy and demanding and saying, I'm sorry, you're on your own, I can't do this. We talk a lot about those kinds of things in the Al-Anon program that I attend, because that's a big part of dealing with alcoholism in a family. And, you know, things like lovingly wanting to support someone, but not enable the disease, or there's all sorts of stuff like that that I could see coming up with these Aries transits, given the underlying reality of Mars and Cancer. And I would say the potential for civic, social, or familial lines being drawn in the sand, or a process that's led to some important turning points within families, that the initiations we're experiencing are somehow familial or ancestral.
Beautiful. I think just a quick, I wanted to say, but I know we have to wrap up, but so common when I meet with people who have sobriety stories that there's a prominent Venus retrograde for them, right, associated with their sobriety.
Oh, that's interesting.
Wow.
I have to look back at mine.
Very common.
That makes me really, like, immediately, of course, I'm like, well, where was mine when I went?
I know. Check it out. I bet there was one. Let me know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So on that note, anything you guys want to add before we peace out?
Definitely listen to Adam's excellent talks on Neptune and Neptune, Saturn, and Aries. It's a really historic transit. They happen like every 4 decades. And to the extent that people have been researching, no one's ever seen one happening at 0 Aries. It's the very, very powerful symbolic new era at the start of the zodiac. So you can't do too much research on that.
Wow. That is really interesting.
Crazy.
Yeah. Is there anything, sorry, Whitney, did you want to add anything?
I'm good.
Okay, great. Just so you guys know, this is crazy. My sobriety began while Venus was in Aries and Mercury was retrograde in Aries.
Oh, wow.
It was March of 2005. And it was Venus in Aries with a Cazimi to the sun in late March, and Mercury was retrograding across the heart of the sun. And the North Node and eclipses were all in my 12th house in Aries. That's crazy.
Wow, that is super crazy. That year there was a Venus retrograde in 2000 at the end of 2005 across your natal moon.
Okay, yeah, that would have been continuation of that story, because as most people know, like the first year is there's some ups and downs, you know. But yeah, I've been I can't believe that. That's actually remarkable that there's a coincidence with that. So I guess that means I'm gonna have to kick chocolate or caffeine, because that's all I have left.
All I have left. You have a 20-year chip this April?
That's right.
That's
no, I
incredible.
didn't. No, I don't have a 20-year chip. My rehabilitation and sobriety came from ayahuasca.
I see.
Yeah, and then therapy. But I actually joined Al-Anon with my wife several years ago. So I think I've got like 3 years in Al-Anon. But,
oh, nice.
Yeah. But in astrological term, if the astrology gives out chips, then I've got one.
For sure.
You got a lot of chips.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to us. And I hope that you guys also enjoy playing with things like this, because a lot of magic happens when you do. So I hope that we have offered you some inspiration, some dates, timelines, themes that you can work meaningfully into your life. Before we go, I want to tell you how you can get in touch with Alexandra and Whitney. So for where am I? Here I go. So Alexandra, you can find on Instagram at 9 Lives Astrology, where she posts regular astrological content and is really fun to follow. You will enjoy that if you're not following her there already. And then 9livesastrology.com, where you can book readings with Alexandra. And she also has events that happen every once in a while. Do you have anything coming up in March?
Yeah, I'm hosting a transit tracking workshop. It's going to be 4 weeks with like 8 people. I'm really excited about that, helping people learn how to track transits and how they communicate with your natal.
Is it too late to join? Can they join?
No, not at all.
Okay, great. Yeah. You guys should check that out for sure. And then I want to tell you how you can learn more about Whitney. You can find her on Instagram at astro.arcana.astrology. I want to send a shout out to Whitney, who has made some changes in her life recently to allow for her to have more time to dedicate to astrology, which is a huge risk that we all take at some point as astrologers when we decide to start going more professional. So we're just so proud of you for taking that leap of faith. And go support Whitney. Give her the thumbs up that she's on the right path by supporting her on Instagram. Book a reading with her. astroarcana.com is where you can find her website as well. So yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Adam. That was so nice. And I'll just add that I'm a big girl now. I added a scheduling app to my website to make it even easier for you to go book readings. So go to that website, book them up.
That's awesome. You guys, it is so fun to have conversations about your chart with people who love to talk about astrology. And that's what you're going to get with Whitney and Alexandra, plus care and thoughtfulness and encouragement. So I really recommend getting a reading with them. Also, I'm going to be out of town for part of March, and Alexandra and Whitney will be hosting next month's monthly overview without me. You'll have substitute teachers in the classroom. Behave, everybody. And we used to just mangle ourselves.
We're going to roll in the big TV on a cart, and we're going to show a movie about an old Rob Hand lecture on a
exactly.
VHS.
When the cat's away, the mice can play.
If the substitute did not have a movie, they were in trouble with us as kids. I'll tell you that. But anyway, the other thing that I will say is that for 1 week, Alex and Dana and Whitney and Alexander will also be guest hosting the podcast for a week while I'm with my family, if the kids are on spring break. So you'll be looking forward to that and some unique content that they'll be cooking up. That'll be toward the beginning of April, if I remember correctly. So anyway, thank you all for listening, and we will see you again next time. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.